Welcome into the Illini Inquirer podcast. Jeremy Werner here with you. Today, we're going to talk about how USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten affects Illinois, affects the Big Ten as well. But I needed to get some insight from what is happening in LA. And our guy, Ryan Abraham at USCfootball.com, part of 24/7 Sports Network, has always been kind to me, whether it was Josh or Matt Torbebe, Trayvon Sidney, Wally Batiku coming to Illinois, but one of our best sites. And now, soon to be a fellow Big Ten site on the 24/7 Sports Network, which is it's crazy, Ryan. But I just got to get the initial reaction when you heard this was going down from USC guy.
Jeremy, it was nuts. So I live in Hermosa Beach, Southern California. The town next door is Redondo Beach. If you heard of it, that's where the Elite 11 usually has their finals camp. And so we were there, all these national media people there, recruiting people. You got Biggins and Blair Angulo, all the guys, all the 247 sports guys from all over the country. You know, USC has a quarterback commit there, Malachi Nelson, 5-star quarterback from Los Alamitos. And it's the third day. It's about to start 7-on-7. I'm with Chris Trevino, who's one of my reporters. And he's looking at his phone, is like, USC and UCLA going to the Big Ten. And we're like, uh-oh, like this is what? And so we're like ready to just cover this recruiting event. And then like, okay, none of this matters. Drop all of this stuff. It is just weird. And we had some of the 247 sports people come to us and like, hey, I have a laptop here and a microphone if you want to record like an emergency podcast. I'm like, I'm literally half a mile from my studio. We're just going to go over there and record the podcast. So we just left the Elite 11, like, bye everybody. And recorded this. And it was just crazy. And by the end of the day, it was official, you know? So covering USC, there's always like, you know, a couple times a year, there's like a drop everything story. Like, I don't understand. Like, whoa, this is crazy. Lincoln Riley was a big one. And this was, I mean, as big as anything, you know, just because it's changing the whole landscape of the future of the athletic department, not just a football team. So yeah, it's been pretty nuts.
Yeah, Ryan, like I've been thinking of the last year, like Lincoln Riley in November, then like Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison. Like it's been enough of a year, USC, and then moved to the Big Ten. But give me your perspective. Were you happy? Were you upset? Like, and how is the fan base? Is it mixed feelings about this move?
Yeah, so I think with the fans starting, Jeremy, it's definitely more mixed than I thought. Like I did a Twitter poll, which, you know, I do a Pac-12 podcast, so I have a lot of like Oregon and Utah fans that follow me too. And that was more like 57% in favor. So I think a lot of them were like other Pac-12 fans, but that kind of shocked me. And we did one on the Peristyle, or USCfootball.com VIP board. And that was more like in the mid 70s. So that probably makes sense, but there's just a lot of people that are into the tradition, you know, maybe not playing Cal and Stanford ever again or every year, stuff like that. The Rose Bowl. I mean, no one's gone to more Rose Bowls than USC, and USC and UCLA, I think, combined for 46% of all the Pac-12 represents, you know, invites to the Rose Bowl. So a lot of that's going to be gone. So there's a lot of changes. I get it. And I think once people realize how, you know, just the economics of this is going to work out, that you can save Olympic sports now, that you're going to get cut. The LA Times had a story today that the UCLA was going to have to cut a whole bunch of sports because they were in so much debt. And this is going to save them from doing that. And there's probably similar stuff that'll come out from USC. So I think the fans it's mixed for sure. For me, like personally, I thought it was huge. I always thought that USC should kind of act like the big dog on the West Coast. And they haven't been doing that. And this is a really bold move, which I didn't think they needed to leave the Pac-12, but apparently, you know, they thought that. But at least, do something like say, hey, we're going to leave unless the Pac-12 treats us a little bit differently than they treat Washington State, which that's not been the case. You know, you see the SEC, they treat Alabama a little bit different. You know, I'm sure in the Big Ten, Ohio State gets a little different. Like they didn't do that for USC. So I feel like it was a bold move. But if they just felt like there was no way that George Kliavkoff can fix all the problems that Larry Scott created or continued in the Pac-12, this was going to be your best option. And like personally, like, you know, we do this for a living. This is big. Like hiring Lincoln Riley was like, my site grew like by 35%. Like, so there's personal, like business reasons like that. You might do the best job covering Illinois, and if the team's terrible, right, it doesn't show, but they make some big coaching hire and it helps your business a lot. And it was the same thing for me where, you know, they hire Lincoln Riley and it was a big deal. And I think this is going to be the same sort of thing going to the Big Ten. But if I'm like taking my journalism hat off and just said, hey, I'm a fan of USC football, like, yeah, all day long, I think this is a great move. And if you want to keep up with the changing times in college football, I think you had to do something like this. So I think this allows them, it doesn't guarantee anything, but it allows them, gives them a path back to national prominence that I don't think you would have been able to continue 5 years from now if the Pac-12 kept going on that same road.
Yeah, 70+% is more than I thought it would have been, to be honest with you. So I think that tells you what USC, what they saw in front of them and said that, hey, Big Ten or SEC is kind of the place to be maybe right now. And, and I see it, Ryan, Illinois football or Illinois and athletic program, because of the Big Ten media rights, can bring in $60-70 million, and USC is getting 20 to 30 million in their Pac-12. Like, that doesn't seem right because it's not the same thing. It's not the same level of football, right? So why did USC see this as like necessary? Because I agree with you, Ryan. I think USC football, which when I was in college was the biggest thing in the world, right? Like, they were the biggest brand at that point with Leinart and Reggie Bush and all that. And then it kind of faded. And now you get Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams and Jordan S. and moved to the Big Ten. I think this is going to build USC back up to being one of the preeminent powers.
Yeah, and it's funny. My college days are a little before yours. My first college game when I went to USC undergrad and grad school, and my very first game was USC Illinois, Jeff George against Todd Marinovich back in 1989. So comeback 14-13 win, I think, for the Illini. So that was like my first college game ever. So it's kind of fun. But yeah, I mean, I think you look at this, like you mentioned, you could say, like, why is Vanderbilt making like 2 or 3 times as much TV revenue as USC? And there's a lot of programs like that, and that's one thing where you're like, okay, whatever. But we've seen like a Purdue come in and hire away, Colorado's head coach. You take Mel Tucker away after a 1-5-7 season and throw $5 or $6 million at them, and like, there's no way Colorado is going to be able to keep up with that because they're in the Pac-12. We could probably start to see more in that if Illinois comes in and like hires Lincoln Riley away, like, we're going to give him $15 million. Like, you're like, holy cow, like, that's a huge thing. Well, I'm not saying it would happen, but stuff like that could potentially. But I think seeing how recruiting, everything's changing. Money is much more involved in the recruiting process with NIL and stuff. It's not from the schools directly, but you're still going to try to bring in top 3 classes, like when USC could do that. And you're competing with Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State for that. And if those schools are having, 3 times the kind of annual revenue that you will have, if it's recruiting staffs, if it's facilities, whatever, I don't think that was going to be sustainable either. So they have aspirations to get back to that level. And I think Lincoln Riley, she's shown he can recruit there. They have the #1 transfer class coming in, but to do that year after year, I don't think having that kind of shortfall on the revenue side was going to be sustainable. You could do it for a little while, but I don't think you could keep that going. So part of it's like what you said, but I think part of it's just like, hey, what are the people we're trying to emulate making? We need to be in that ballpark if we want to compete.
So Ryan, UCLA and USC looked like a package deal here. So we obviously know UCLA basketball, right? And it's had its ebbs and flows, but it's still one of the better programs. I think fits seamlessly into the Big Ten. But why was this a package deal? Like, what does UCLA bring into the Big Ten along with USC?
It's funny. John Wilner, who broke this story, does a great job covering the Pac-12 for the San Jose Mercury News Group. He was on Feinbaum, and they asked him that, and he's like, well, mostly their affiliation with USC. So that's why they were there. Part of it, I mean, being able to lock down the LA market is important. I think just having a partner, if it was like USC and Notre Dame joining together, like, obviously that's huge, but USC is pretty alienated. So just having like a partner, I think helps. And that's was one of the cool things about the Pac-12. It's like there was just all these partners, like Oregon State, Washington State, Arizona State, the Cal Stanfords, USC, UCLA. So having those partnerships, I think, is something that's beneficial. If you look at, what the Big Ten values, I think there's similar values with the Pac-12, where you talk about academics and research institutions and all that, and other sports. And I think I was watching Big Ten Network, which I can get, and I can't get the Pac-12 Network, which is funny. But I think USC and UCLA bring in like 243 combined national championships, like, into the conference. And I think the Big Ten will have more, because the Pac-12 calls itself the Conference of Champions, but Stanford, USC, and UCLA have the majority of those. And now two of those, Stanford has the most, but USC and UCLA are 2 or 3 in the country. Now they're going to the Big Ten. I think that's, part of the appeal too. But I think just that kind of partnership, and it makes more sense, I think, for USC and like a UCLA to go in, just owning the LA market, and then as opposed to like a USC and an Oregon or Washington or something like that. But UCLA has a lot of potential too on the football side. We've seen some greatness at times, and I think maybe they're going to take athletics a little more serious. Just hiring Chip Kelly hasn't worked out great. I mean, they're on a better path now, but that was a big move. We have never seen UCLA do something like that. So I think if you're joining the Big Ten, you're not doing this for all the other sports. Like, you have to take football seriously, and we'll see if they're going to be able to do that. But there's definitely benefit having both teams, but I think USC was still like the bus driver of the partnership.
Ryan, the Big 12 found a way to survive, at least in the short term, when we were calling them dead last year when they lost Texas and Oklahoma. Can the Pac-12 survive? What do you see next for them?
I mean, I'm very, like, Bob Bosley, the commissioner, the former commissioner now. I mean, a lot of criticism there if you follow the Big 12 at all, but as good of a job as you could have done after that, what you thought was a mortal wound, he patched it up, got them back, rehabbed, and like, they're a strong conference now. They don't have the brand, they don't have the big brand, but they are very stable. They're in a probably better spot than anyone else that's not the SEC or the Big Ten. And the ACC is locked in this long deal that's not very good. And the Big 12 reached out with an olive branch last year when they lost Texas and Oklahoma to the Pac-12, and there was no life preserver thrown their way. Now, the Pac-12 didn't rate them, but they also didn't help them. And so now the Pac-12 is in a position that they need help somewhere. So what can you do? I mean, there's the ACC you could try to partner with instead of like this handshake agreement that just fell apart. When there was no contract, this wasn't going to last very long between the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12, but maybe that's something to work with the ACC and allow them to renegotiate their TV contract and get out of that. That could be beneficial to both. I don't know if the Big 12 is going to partner when they could just come in and kind of raid the Pac-12, because the Arizona schools, Colorado, and Utah would help, I think, the Big 12 a lot. They don't have the big brand that you would be shrinking the size of each pie if you add those markets, because you're adding Salt Lake City, you're adding Phoenix, Denver. It would probably be at least even, or maybe even a little better. And the Big 12 right now, without the big brand, probably bulk is a little bit better than anything. So you add some really strong teams and maybe even like an Oregon and a Washington. So I think all that would be possible. But for the Pac-12, like, you feel bad for George Kliavkoff. It's been a year since he took over, and it's just a mess. I think they announced today that they were going to start negotiations for their, media rights deals. And I think what he's trying to do is keep the 10 teams he has together. But it's sort of like, it's like herding cats. You're just trying to keep everyone together, and they're just jumping out. I mean, there's going to be teams that will jump. I mean, we might find out tomorrow or in an hour or, a week from now that the Arizona schools and Utah and Colorado are going to leave, or Washington. I don't think Washington and Oregon end up in the Big Ten yet. I think the Notre Dame domino has to fall, but that's probably good for the Pac-12, but they have to stop the bleeding. And there's a lot of leaks all over the place. If I had to bet on, and I do a podcast, I do the Podcast of Champions, a Pac-12 podcast, and I love it. It's a lot of fun, but I don't know if we're going to be around in 2 years. I just don't see, even if I kept doing it after USC leaves for the Big Ten, I don't see a way that the Pac-12 survives this. I mean, there's going to have to be some Hail Marys thrown, and I think it's going to be really tough. The Big 12 had some low-hanging fruit out there in the group of five, and they did a good job, adding Cincinnati and UCF and Houston and BYU. Those teams are gone now. So, like, is adding Boise State and San Diego State and Fresno State going to be the same thing? There's just no way to replace USC and UCLA. So I think it's going to be really tough for the Pac-12 to keep going. But I like George Kliavkoff. He's going to try like hell to make it work. I just don't know if it's going to be enough.
If the Big Ten added any more from the Pac-12, is Stanford atop that list with the Notre Dame? Like, Notre Dame, you said, like, that's clearly the number one. I think Stanford makes all the cultural sense. The Bay Area, if markets still matter. And then Oregon and Washington, I've long thought would make a lot of sense. So if the Big Ten's building a Western wing and came to Ryan Abraham and said, hey, which 3 should we add with Notre Dame? What would you pick?
Yeah, no, I think it's weird. The Stanford one, the Bay Area schools are just strange. And that just West Coast football is just different than other places. Like if you told me tomorrow that Stanford decided to stop playing football, like I wouldn't be like shocked. Like, and this is a team that was like winning Rose Bowls and going like, they've had a lot of success, but I don't think they want to play the new game with NIL. And if players eventually become employees and all that, like, I don't think they want to go down that road. So people have talked about Stanford, Notre Dame coming in together. And you could argue Stanford would be the last one that you would want to bring, because I don't even know what the dedication to football is long-term if they're going to play that game. And you feel bad for Cal, who's trying real hard, and that's kind of their partner. Like, it'd be tough to break that one up, but you could see a scenario where Stanford and Notre Dame come in. I think the 2 bigger brands, like you mentioned, Washington and Oregon, if you're just really trying to build that up, the problem is they're not going to, USC and UCLA make everyone's piece of pie, even though it's more pieces, make them bigger. Like Oregon and Washington wouldn't do that. So you're really more like kind of making people happy. But if I'm talking to USC and UCLA people, I don't think they care to have Oregon come along, or at least right now. It's one of those things where Oregon's done a great job recruiting Southern California, and you're kind of like, well, we're going to leave you behind. How are you going to recruit now that you're in this lower division? So I don't think that USC people, and initially they're like, oh, you want to see all these teams join. But then after a while, you're like, that's probably better. They kind of don't do it. But if you're trying to make the league stronger, just like brands, and like just they don't care about money, I think, it'd be nice to have the Bay Area schools and like Oregon and Washington coming along. But like Utah's probably the most Big Ten team that, the Pac-12 has, the way they play. And I just love the way they built that program. But, I don't know. They're probably more of a Big 12 kind of team right now than a Big Ten.
It's like Wisconsin West or Iowa West.
Yeah.
Well, Ryan, USC, Ohio State, is that how they're going to open this thing in 2024 in week 2 or something like that? I think that'd be fantastic, but you're going to get a lot of Midwest traveling in and maybe some East Coast as well. It's crazy to think the Trojans will be coming up here that often.
It's crazy. I've been to like Nebraska. I've been to the Horseshoe, I've been to Columbus, but like I've been to like the Big House. I've been to Champaign. Like I want to check out some of the different venues, going to Iowa, any of the, the Happy Valley, all that kind of stuff would be fun. USC opens with LSU in the 2024 season, like in Las Vegas. So like you open like LSU and then like Ohio State in the Coliseum or in the Horseshoe like the next week. Like that'd be pretty fun. They end it with Notre Dame. So like, they're going to have a 9-game, most likely Big Ten schedule, bookended by LSU and Notre Dame. So that'll be a fun first year in the conference.
Well, Ryan Abraham, USCfootball.com, man. I know you've been busy. It's been crazy time for you guys, but welcome to the Big Ten officially. And can't wait to talk more and can't wait to visit out at USC.
Thanks so much. I have had so much fun, like watching like my friends that cover Texas and Oklahoma talking about the SEC. Like we're like part of the, and they're not part of it yet. Like I just want to have fun with it. Like if someone talks trash about the Big Ten, I can go on Twitter and like, don't talk about my conference like that. So all the fun kind of jokes you can do for the next 2 years. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. I wonder how long it's going to take for USC fans to say my conference. Hey, Big Ten, LA. It's going to be crazy. Ryan, thanks, man.
Thank you.